Hey there, and welcome to Culturally Sound. I'm here with Palu, who is the founder and brain behind CreativeWise, a cultural branding and packaging company. Palu, how about you introduce who and what that is and how we can talk about how that aligns culturally with what you're looking to do?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Like I said, I'm Palu. I'm the founder and creative director of CreativeWise. We are a packaging design agency. We do branding and packaging for brands in the CPG industry. We work mainly with brands that have a cultural background, and that can come from a lot of different things, but we can touch on that later. And we basically help them craft their narrative and express what makes them unique through packaging design.
Awesome. And where did you start? Let's talk about your origin story and how you found yourself with this as your path.
Yeah, it's a bit of a long story, but it all goes back to like 2016 when I did an exchange year in the Philippines. I'm from Argentina, and that was my first time abroad ever, which was very interesting because it was a bit of a culture shock for a bit. It took a few months to, get the hang of it and start enjoying it. But once I did, I started to, find so much interest in the contrast between cultures and what the Philippines was in contrast to Argentina. And, that took me in a long journey that it's still going on with my love for traveling. I then went back to Argentina. I had to finish my high school because I was very young still. And then I moved to Germany where I still wanted to keep traveling. So I wanted to find something that would allow me to do that and like work online. And it was the beginning kind of like working remote. And you could hear back then, I read in 2018, and the only people that were like traveling and working were bloggers. But they will,
Right.
talk everything about it because they will blog about it, and they were either like, making money with it or other things. So my idea was to go to university at that point. So I was like, what can I do? What can I study that would allow me to work remote? And then that's how I found design, and I really fell for it. Like I was like, oh my God, I love the idea of being a creative. I love the idea of like, being an artist, even though I never thought of myself like that. But then I started to getting, what is it to be a designer? What does it mean? And for a few different reasons, I realized I was not going to go to university, especially not in Europe, because it was a bit complicated for me. And I really wanted to keep moving around the world. And going back to Argentina was not an option for me. I was like, I'm going to try, I will give it a try. And then at that point, long story short, like my visa in Germany was finished. I had a visa as a language student. So I gave it a chance and I moved to Bali with some savings that I had that I was working there in a restaurant. And I was like, I'm gonna make it work as a designer. Now what's the worst thing that can happen? I can always go back and study. I was
Right.
very young still, so it took a lot of work. It took a lot of, working with like not getting any projects, not making any money, and like keep going and talking to a lot of people. And at that point for me, Bali was the perfect place. I think there was no better place for me to be at the moment, because back then Bali was like the one capital for digital nomads. So everybody there was, trying to make it or had already a company, and they were all entrepreneurs. They were very like-minded people, and that's really where I needed to be, even though I was still not there. But like I would go to these places, people would talk about marketing. I used to always talk about it as like, that my time in Bali was like somebody opened my brain and just like dumped all this information on me, and like it was a before and after experience. And since then, I've been traveling around the world. I've been living as a digital nomad, building my design agency. What started as freelance and transitioned into, hiring designers, finding the right people to work with, and creating a small team of really, really, really talented creatives that kind of get my vision, that we especially have a good synergy to work with. And that naturally, I did it all. Like I was doing web design, UI, UX, branding. I tried it all. Whatever was thrown at me, I was like, I'm gonna do it, until I slowly started to find what I really like doing, and that was packaging design. And at first it felt very niche, but then I was like, still huge. Like there's so much within the packaging world. So it felt very natural for me to gravitate towards brands in the cultural space, because so many brands have that. It's still a really big market, but I think, so there's so many brands that have these very powerful stories, and they just don't know how to translate that into good design and a good narrative. And there's so many brands nowadays that maybe they end up looking alike just because of like trends and things that they think they follow, the path to success, but they're missing so much potential that there is behind their culture.
Yeah, and so I think that from a brand perspective, it really speaks to authenticity. And I think when you're able to step away from just following the trends and being the trend, which, leveraging the culture of where you're coming from and where that originates from, really gives good opportunity, right? So
Yeah,
great,
100%.
great positioning from that perspective. So here you are today with your concept, your idea, your thought. It's live, it's living, it's breathing. And what does that look like from a systems that you have in place that are thriving and successful and working for you? And what about systems that keep aren't quite in place, and you continue to think, oh my God, I got to get around to that and improve that, or how does that manifest for you?
Well, I think one of the systems that worked very well for me and that gave us a lot of the, project success that we had in many projects is having a great team. And that for me meant, like interviewing so many people to find the right people. And even, when I'm like not always looking to hire people, but I'm still interviewing people because I want to, find the right people to work with. And I often will say to them, like, I don't have any project right now, but like I really want to get to know you to see when the project comes, like I want to know that you are the right person. And to me, that has worked wonderful. I think the thing that we're still like improving on, and I think this is part of moving around too much as well, is that it makes it a little bit more difficult to create a powerful network. I think, it's kind of like a power. I think I'm good with people, but at the same time, if you're not long enough with people, it's hard to deeply connect with them. And of course, you can connect with a ton of people, and I've met a ton of people just like you and I, like, we met through the internet, and I created a lot of connections like that. But I feel like I need to get in the real world and meet more people, and I'm trying to do that when I'm in places, let's say Mexico City. I was living in Mexico City this year, and now I'm way more intentional about where I'm going because of my business. Before I used to travel, like, all these places, it's fun, it's beautiful, I want to know them. And now I'm like, okay, where am I going to benefit from like a professional perspective? And Mexico was a great place for that. Like I went to a lot of networking events, I met great people. And for me, as a, working with cultural brands, Mexico is the perfect place because it's
Sure.
such a, their economy is thriving, like they have so many, products that are very tied to the culture. And but yeah, then I had to leave for some other reasons, and I was like, there's all these connections that you make that you have to foster them. And like you can't, if you leave, people sometimes are like, what's the point of like hanging out with this person if she's leaving? And that's kind of like the thing that I struggle with. So I always try to go back to those places and try to enforce my relationship with people.
So that's interesting that you say that, because I mean, obviously we're all well aware this is 4 years post COVID, and remote work just boomed out of that experience. And a lot of people are still looking to maintain that relationship with their employer, or whoever they're working with. And so, you're sort of saying being face to face and having those interactions and those you know in-person relationships are critical to that network relationship. So how are you managing to maintain those relationships as you continue to move on and experience more of the world as you feel sort of offer that next opportunity for you?
I think this doesn't work with everyone, but a lot of what I try to do is like, stay in touch. Some people are very busy, but people that I actually have a great connection with, like, I insist like, hey, I'm leaving, but can we please can we please, it's more like, do you want to connect once a month? Like, let's just chat,
Sure.
like that's the thing about like, I think the difference between online relationships and in-person relationships, that not many people have meetings just for the sake of like chatting, whereas like maybe you meet for a coffee just for like, how are you doing, how's everything
Mhm.
going? And I'm trying to create those connections online, like, hey, can we just, I have a couple of people that I will make sure at least once, like every 2 months we have a call without any purpose. It's just for the sake of like, hey, how is everything going, like keeping that connection alive. And
That's the
that has been
purpose. Yeah.
working for me. But some people, obviously people are busy, like you have so much in your life that you need to make time for it. So I think that's something I'm trying to do more. I'm trying to get into like online networking events
Mhm.
as well. But I think
Interesting.
it's some about staying in touch with people. Like I try to take the time to be present, and even if it's replying to an Instagram comment, something personal,
Mhm.
that it doesn't feel like it's for work. It's just like for the sake of staying connected.
Yeah, yeah. So I think, and it's one of the points that um, I think is really important to me is reestablishing that sense of community, regardless of whether you're next door to each other in the same office or you're working on the same team in presence. Maintaining that sense of community or building that sense of community outside of those in-person relationships. That's kind of an interesting point. When you focus on your decisions around where to go and what to do, how do you measure your decisions in it doesn't need to be just locational, but is this a good client? Is this a good next step? How do you manage your decision making in what steps are in front of you and how you're going to take that next step forward? Because I find decision making is one of those things where you can get stuck in analysis paralysis, and it's, ooh, is this a good idea? I don't know. How do you manage that?
Well, I think there's a few different things there. And, one thing is where to go and where to live, another is what project to take and which people to work with. I think something all of those have in common is just a feeling. At least for me, I'm a very, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I think for being a Latina also, I'm very logical, but I also am very connected to my emotions. And I think that's, to me, very important. How does this feel right? Talking to someone, like I think, aside from like, is this a good project, like money wise, or like just what the project means to us, it's like, do I feel like I'm going to enjoy working with this person? Like, you can get that feeling, to me at least, like, through having a video call, like you can get the vibe. And to me, that is very important, as well as work, my team is like, you can be the best designer, but like, if we don't vibe, like, it's just not going to work. That's why, like, I say to my team, one of the biggest values for me is like, synergy. I'm like having that connection that just feels like fun aside from just work. And then when I think about, more like strategic thinking of like, where am I going to move or what are we doing? A lot of that has to do with, I guess, planning goals, like for, planning ahead, like, for next year, or like, where do we want to be next year, and kind of doing reverse engineering for that. That can work, on like our marketing efforts and things that we're doing. And then where to move, it's a mix of things, I guess. It's like, I like to explore new places, but now I'm considering, where is my industry thriving? Like people that are doing the things that I'm doing, where can I find them? Where can I find, potential clients? And that with a combination of a place where I'm gonna enjoy living, because at the end of the day, you do gotta, live. uh, so I'm looking now, for example, which is really interesting because I come from a tiny, tiny town in Argentina. I grew up in like a 40,000 people town, and I'm a city girl now. I don't like, I love to be in like these massive cities, and where, you know, there's always something to do and there's things to learn and explore and people to meet. And a place like Mexico City is, for example, very strategic because you said a ton of people that are doing business there, people that are coming and going, people that are like looking to invest in the country. And like that, I feel like there are different places. Also, within the digital nomad community, there are certain cities that are like hotspots where everybody goes, and that you know it's going to be a great place to meet other people and like other foreigners that are usually, you know, doing their own business or things like this, and like co-working spaces. And once you're in this place, like you gotta be strategic also where you move, because just by being there you won't meet these people, so you gotta go the extra step and like, you know, find these places like co-working spaces, cafes, or events, things like that, where sometimes you're like, oh my god, I just feel like being home, but like you gotta push yourself to go and meet these people, and then be intentional about, at least for me, like who do I really want to connect with, because you can't connect with everyone. So
Right.
I rather connect really well with one or two people than make 10 connections that I'm probably never gonna talk to them again.
So something that you've sort of touched on many times, which I don't think is a priority to a generation ahead of you or two generations ahead of you, and it's the idea of joy and really enjoying who you're working with or where you're working, or and having that. I, I don't want to call it a balance, but being intentional about bringing joy into your life. And it's something that's a core tenet of what we push at Core Ethos around, you know, don't just do it for the money, because
Mm-hmm.
you can make money with, you know, as long as you're scrappy and have some grit and
Mm-hmm.
are smart, you can make money at anything these days. If you have a unique perspective and you know how to market it and all the rest, and you do what you need to do, find someone that can package it as beautifully as you can, then you'll be in a great position. But you seem very intentional about joy. So can you dive into that? Can we pull on that thread a little bit further? How important to you is that, and like how do you intentionally integrate that into your life? Is that something that you are purposeful about? How does that measure?
Um, yeah, I think for me, it's been kind of like the driver for this whole life that I had, right? Like it all started, like I told you, like I wanted to keep traveling. So I was like,
Mhm.
that made me happy. And I found a way to get the life that I want so that it would allow me to travel. And obviously for me, traveling is something that brings me a lot of joy. Um, but I feel like, I don't know if this is something I grew up with. I mean, for sure, like I come from a family that will prioritize happiness over a lot of things. So I think that helps for sure. But it's kind of, we have the choice, you know, like you can always choose the things, like you're saying. There's this quote I heard from somebody say, like, I'm not going to work with anyone just because they know how to make money, because making money is not that hard. Like you might as well work with people that you share values with, and like you
Mhm.
can enjoy what you're doing. And I agree with that. And for me, it's uh I I remember like the first, maybe I haven't said this in a while, but like at the first 3 or 4 years when I was traveling, I used to always say like, I'm living my best life, you know, and like I was like, I need to have this feeling, like, you know, at the second that I'm like, I'm not living my best life, like that is super important to me, because I know I was here and like I want to stay here, you know, and like that for me, stay kind of like present, because I'm like, whatever I'm doing, I wanna enjoy it. And I think that comes from early on. Maybe it was luck. I don't know, like taking the right decisions towards the thing that I wanted to do. And as soon as I got there, I was like, this feels good. So I wanna, you know, keep working so that I can maintain my level of happiness and joy, as much as I wanna keep growing and being ambitious. And a lot of that has to do with doing the thing that I like. Like that's a number one thing. Like I chose design because I was super excited about the idea of being a designer. And even if now, you know, as being the founder of the agency or the creative director, I don't purely do design all the time because I have, you know, a team of designers, but like everything is around this one thing that I love, and like I want to work with these brands. And I think it's taking the decisions, like, you know, like working with someone. It's like, yeah, you're gonna do it for the money, yes, but somebody else's money also to work with you. So it's always like, you know, a balance between your needs, of course, because you also have to put whatever needs that you have for your team and like finance, and balancing that with what actually you enjoy. And the truth is, you're not going to enjoy everything. Like, you know, there's things that you do and you're like, okay, I don't love this project. I don't, but it's part of it. And I hope everything is getting me closer to more and more of that I actually love doing and drives me.
Is there a mechanism that you have in place for how you ensure that your team is following that value, that they're fulfilling their joy, or they're fulfilling, or you're supporting them in what that looks like? What does that sort of relationship look like for you with your team?
Open communication, probably, you know, that's a big thing for me, and in everything, you know, work and relationships, all kinds of relationships, it's like that's the number one thing. And like I'm very honest and open with my team about everything, and asking a lot of questions. You know, I, again, like you can always get the feeling when somebody's excited about something or not. And I'm always like, you know, if you don't want to work in this, like I, you know, I can have someone else work on it, that's somebody that's actually very interested in this project. But I think that the only way, at least for me, the best way to do it is asking. And, you know, I feel like we got to a point where everybody's very comfortable sharing, sharing how they're feeling. And for me, it's like, I'm very open to feedback myself. Like I, you know, you cannot offend me. And I try to always let them know, like, you know, let me know, like, is there a better way we can do this? If you think, and more and more, I feel like they do, you know, when they are like, hey, Paolo, like, I think this is not the most efficient, or like, you know, I need you to do it this way because otherwise it doesn't work for me. And I think it's all about having that open communication with them.
Interesting. And so does that type of conflict, or that kind of pushback happen often, or is that sort of a rare experience for you?
I think it's pretty rare because we're from the start, we're all in the same boat. Like, you know, they
Yeah.
all enjoy doing the projects that we're doing. So every
Yeah.
time we have a new project, you know, it, like we're all very excited, I think. And especially as we're leaning more and more to the type of clients that we really want to work with.
Right.
It feels like, you know, every time, you know, we get a nice packaging project that they, you know, have a lot of things to pull from, it's like everybody's just very excited. And there is also, again, like not every project is, or every task, you know, there's some things about not a client project but part of our marketing that maybe is not as exciting. But I think we're, you know, we enjoy the relationship of working together, and that helps a lot because, you know, not everything is super exciting or super fun, but like if we get to, you know, do it together and share feedback and it's just flowing quite easily.
Mhm.
I hope that answers your question.
Great. Yeah, no, it's good. So I guess a lot of the time I always encourage asking for that type of critical feedback, right? And being open and encouraging for those types of, you know, it's sometimes called mining for conflict, right? And I think
Mhm.
it's Patrick Mincioni that coined that phrase. But you know, when you're in those situations and you're sensing, you know, as you suggested, you know, working off the feelings, you get that feeling like, you know, there's not complete buy-in on from the team on what we're discussing here. So how do you push back on the team to ensure that that open communication is in place, and you're able to position yourself actively so that you're not missing blind spots on your leadership, and you know that type of feedback is coming through in truth, or they're being fully present with that type of response to you?
Sometimes I think what helps is like before even giving my opinion,
Hmm.
asking them what they think, you know, and
Great.
not imposing my opinion first, because
Hmm.
then they kind of have to, I don't know, I don't want them to feel like they have to agree with me, even though
Like
when I do
bias.
give my opinion first because I have things to say,
Sure.
I, you know, I would always ask, like, you know, how else would you do it? You know, if you had to pick another a way that wasn't
Mhm.
mine. And
Mhm.
that's not like, you know, I'm opposing to you, but like I'm asking them, like, let's say what I just said, it doesn't work at all. What is another way to do it? And I think when it comes to design also, like there are many ways to do things. Like, you know, there is no right way to do it. It's so abstract, and there's so many things that as the creative director, I can set a path. Like this is, you know, that what they want, and these are the limits. And that's kind of the amazing thing about design, that sometimes you feel like if you don't have any restrictions, it's so much harder than if people say, you know, from here and here you can do whatever, but these are the restrictions. And that's when your mind can work within these limits, and it's much easier for designers most of the time. And we always have more than one option, you know, we work in many options. So I would give a direction, and then I give a lot of, I think this has a lot to do with it too, like I'm not giving too much direction. It's part like, this is what we have to do, and within this I want to see what you come up with, and then I'll give my feedback, you know. And maybe I'm a bit annoying with that, but I'm always like, what do you think, like how will you do it? And like making sure they can share that. And so far it has worked very well. I mean, I'm hoping they feel that they are not keeping anything from themselves for themselves, but it
Yeah.
feels very natural.
That's a great holistic approach, right? And you know what you were pointing to is sort of creating a bias, right? And you want to try
Mhm.
to avoid that as much as possible with your team, especially when you're looking to delegate responsibility to your team and not just abdicate it or you know, impose your will on your team. And you know, the best way I always frame it is you want to create the guide rails on either side and pave the highway, and then let them go as fast as they can down that road, driving to wherever that path may lead. So I mean that's a great creative approach, and it's something that I really encourage with the teams that I work with. So I mean, good.
Yeah, I think also it's like trusting what they are good at. Because oftentimes, like you know, I'm a designer myself, but like I was lucky enough that I get to hire people that are better than me in many aspects. So it's like sometimes I'm like, you know, I tell you what I think, but like I trust that you can do it even better. So encouraging, I guess, and keeping it very positive, and letting them know, you know, I hired you because you can do what you do, and not
Yeah.
for you to follow my instructions. And I think that's what happens a lot with design, you know, the relationship between designers and clients, that oftentimes it feels like, you know, you hired me to be the creative mind, but then you want to direct this whole project, and that's when it gets a little bit conflicted, because it's, you know, one thing is you hire someone for them to, you know, move the mouse and use Illustrator and just the skills that they have on the software. And another thing is hiring someone for the expertise that they have in, you know, in the creative mind. And I think that for me is very important with the people I work with, because I don't know, I work with video editors, things that I don't do myself. So I'm like, you know, I trust you. Like I know you can do a great job. And I think I know it for myself, that feels very encouraging.
For sure. And I think that's a really supportive leadership perspective that you have. And I mean, good for you, because that's a really mature perspective that a lot of leaders, you know, struggle with is the concept that, you know, you don't want to be the smartest person in the room. If you are, you're in the wrong room. And you know, if you surround yourself with those experts that are more capable than you, the end result is that your brand and your agency are the ones that are successful, because it excels and elevates and lifts up. And not only that, but it also, you know, the sign of a great leader is how many other leaders that they can create and the support that they offer to those individuals. So, I mean, brilliant approach, and good on you. How do you,
Thank you.
and I think you're welcome. What I'd like to pull on next is that point that you made around hiring the expert, right? And you know, how do you deal with those relationships with your clients where um, maybe they know what they want and they're telling you how to provide it? Because that's got to be a hard conversation to have in the moment of you know, you hired me to provide a product and now you're telling me how to create it. So what's the point in me being here?
I think that has changed over the years. I feel like when I was more of a junior designer, I would have that a lot more. And it's kind of
Okay.
like a funny paradox because the more people pay, like the least they wanna, influence because they trust you. But clients that pay very little for some reason, it just happens that they, kind of don't trust you as much, like because they don't pay you as much, they don't trust what you're doing, so they think like they have a saying, and maybe that's true in many cases, right? Because you're still a junior designer, but um a lot of it has to do with understanding what they really need and asking the right questions and really
Interesting.
getting into, okay, who's your target audience, because you are most likely not your target audience. So like who I think what found a lot of the mistakes that founders make is like basing their decisions on personal preference. And that's when you gotta go, okay, but are you your target audience? Probably not. So let's, research who your target audience is. What are they buying? What are other products they're using? What are they interested on? And I think it's, showing expertise. So like, I really want to understand your product and what's in the best interest for your brand and not just for it to look beautiful. Because I think that's a big thing with design. So many people just feel like, oh, it just has to look pretty. Not really. Like, yeah, it has to look pretty, but like it has a goal, and it's like when it comes to packaging, it's like I feel like a marketing asset that is often overlooked, because how many of your ads are actually seen by 100% of your customers? How many ads are like running 24 hours? Your packaging is, an ad on its own that has to perform and has to, people have to, for example, people go to the supermarket and they don't pick up every product. They would just pick probably one or two and barely read it. So you need to make sure, and you need to make sure that they read what's important first and that they buy in just by a quick glance. And I think explaining those things to client is part of the job. You have to help them understand what's in their best interest outside of just aesthetics. And I feel like that comes with experience as well. The more you can educate them in some way, the more trust you gain from them. And then that trust translates to your creativity and your team. And and that comes when you want to present the designs, and you can't just present a design, okay, this is a design. No, you have to explain why that is a design and what everything means and why you took the decisions that you took to get there. And that's how you, I guess, buy in so that the client is convinced outside of just their personal preference.
Yeah, and I love that, that trust element keeps coming up in the conversation, and your point of view, trust with your team, trust with your clients, and leveraging that relationship. And it's what I heard in a lot of what you were saying was redirecting the conflict between you and the client to the goal, which is, do we want the product to be successful, and do we want it to be picked up when it's an option of one of 100 on a shelf. And I think realigning and refocusing on that as a strategy is brilliant. So with where the current state of your company, the current state of your vertical, your market, where are you going? What does the next 5 years look like? What does the next 10 years look like in your business, in your niche, what does that look like for you?
For our brand, so
Sure.
we're still a pretty small team right now. So
Mhm.
I think for me it's like finding more people probably that can join this team and like share all of these values we're talking about, and to understand we're all going in the same direction. And my, I guess, yeah, like my strategy right now is more on like educating people that, founders mostly. And a big part of what I'm doing now, my work, and like what we talked about networking, is like I'm, connecting with a lot of founders, trying to, grow my network on LinkedIn as well. Now that we're talking about like online networking, and trying to educate them in how they can translate because, cultural, I'm going to go back a little bit and explain for me what it
Please.
means cultural, because I feel like a lot of people associate cultural design, culture in general, with a country, right? Or like a religion or something very particular. And, the definition of culture is like the essence of people, things that people, the stories, values, traditions that people share. And that can come for, especially brands in the CPG industry, that can come from many different things. Like I think 4 core aspects is, the founder story. A lot of brands come from like a founder that has a story to tell, and that's why they arrive to the product that they have right now. It can come from the sourcing materials. Where do the materials come from? Like, what's the story there? Like, where are they harvested, etc. And then craftsmanship, like, how is this product made? Like, there's so much there as well to talk about. Like, it's a family tradition, or is it from a place, something very special? Or the 4th one is cultural significance. And there's so many products that, not exactly the brand, but the product itself is very meaningful for a culture, for a group of people. And that could be, like mate. We had this conversation, like mate tea is for Argentinians, or tea is from London, or the UK, or India. Everybody has their own way to do it. I think, there's so many products nowadays that have the one or more of these aspects, and they are just not leveraging it. I feel like it makes them unique, and they could stand apart by, pulling from there to create their brand narrative. And a lot of, like we talked about, like a lot of these brands are leaning towards trends because it's what's working for others, but they don't really identify that there's something very special about their brand that they could be highlighting and, be one of a kind, instead of blending in the market. So for me, that's my mission right now, and educating people what it means to, have a cultural richness in your brand, and how you can leverage that for your own marketing, and to relate to people, and not only relate to people from that culture, but also create curiosity in other people, and people that don't know about it and understand. And we're living in a world where cultures are starting to mix so much, and I think that's super interesting. And I'm really excited to see how that's gonna play out, because already I feel like there is a bunch of brands right now in the market that, for example, are mixing. There's one brand I saw the other day, they're mixing Italian tomato sauce with gochujang, which is like a very famous hot sauce in Korea. And
Yes.
they call it something like not your typical sauce, like not your
Yes.
grandma's sauce. And this mix of cultures, I think, is going to be something very interesting to look at. And I'm really curious to know how that's going to play out visually also in the next few years.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. So how do you balance the line? And I may be pulling at a thread that isn't a thread, but curious to hear your perspective on it. How do you balance the line of culturally connecting a package, a brand, a product, and not appropriating the culture corporately? Like, how do you stay authentic to that? Because to me, it would seem like that could be a delicate balance. Do you feel that way? Do you
I think founders sometimes have that fear when it's not their culture, right? Like, when it's your culture, people feel like, I know what I'm doing, and like it's my culture. So it's kind of like you have that sense of pride of like, I couldn't appropriate because it's my culture. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But more and more you see, for the sake of selling a product, people are using other cultures to create products, or I don't know, exporting or importing, mezcal, tequilas, etc., to the US, and making brands that are actually native from the US. Like, it's just that the material comes from Mexico, for example. And I think that is, I would say research is a number one, making sure, I feel like you can use, what makes other cultures rich, as long as you're using it right, and you're not, misusing elements, misusing phrases, or what things mean to that country. And I think that comes, from research, like doing, research about the culture, and talking to people that are from that place, and see what they feel. And, that comes from, I feel like, brands that are doing this, or also when brands are trying to go global, right? Like, sometimes they go global and they try to do advertisement in other countries, and it's a bit of a mess because things don't translate exactly how they're supposed to. There's actually a funny case study, or like an example of Pepsi that did a commercial in Taiwan, and it went really bad because the translation was, I think it was something like Pepsi brings your family from the dead, something like this. And it was just backlash on them. Like it was many, many years ago. And
Right.
that comes from like simply asking someone, like
Yeah.
from that place, can you read this? What does this mean to you? Does this feel right? And for me, often it's like, if I would work sometimes, let's say a brand from Italy, like I'm in Italy right now, and like I'll talk to designers in Italy, or I might as well also hire a designer from Italy if I'm working with freelancers in that case. But I think it's just making sure you're using the elements and the storytelling of your product in the right way, and that it just feels right for the people of that culture.
Getting your toes in the dirt and getting that community around what you're creating. Yeah, for sure. That's interesting. So how, as you tell these stories, I saw some content from you around coffee from Colombia. How do you, what challenges are you facing as you continue down this journey of connecting products to their culture and making that connection with the founders and the owners that are missing that mark?
I think what one challenge I think for working with this, like for founders for different brands, but especially brands that do have this kind of rich background, it's like the fear for people of like breaking the rules a little bit, or like breaking what we talked about, trendy or minimalism. The
Right.
world went for a while, like the last 3 years, all into like minimal, less is more. And I'm a little bit the opposite, going the opposite way. Let's just go all in and visually just create brands that are very rich. And there is always that fear of like, what are people gonna say, or like, is it gonna offend anyone, or is it people are gonna like it? Does it feel like people are already buying? And that thing of standing apart sounds good, but in practice it's kind of scary, because it's also like it's not proven to work. So people are like oftentimes trying to go for the safer path. And for me, as like the person who's pitching this ideas is breaking with that like inside of the box thinking, and like we
Yeah.
can do it differently and it's
Mhm.
still create an iconic brand. And probably if everything goes well, we're going to be more iconic that all these brands that they're iconic as a group because they all look very similar.
Yeah. No, for sure. And that's it's a really unique and daring perspective. And I think um, all of the experiences that you continue to charge out into travel and then experience new cultures, experience new spaces, all culminating in that passion around what you're building. And that's really inspiring. Good for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's interesting working with people from different countries, and in my team as well. We have people from Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Brazil. Like we're a whole mix, and that's so interesting, as well as working with clients from all over. There's there's so much to learn, and sometimes it's challenging because there is a cultural difference. There is a working culture that has to be understood, and things that you need to pay attention to, that when you're working with people from your own countries, like you can read between the lines better because you understand the way people think.
Mhm.
And for me, it's like it's challenging but very exciting to learn, not only through travel but through work, to learn about different ways of working. And I think that's where the world is going. We're all mixing, we're all having these experiences, and I feel like it's very interesting, and you gotta be open-minded.
For sure. And,
Do you
and
agree with
I think
that?
it's exciting. I think it's exciting. Well, anything else that you want to touch on that you want to explore? I mean, that's been an incredible journey, and I'm excited about following your future. And where can people connect with you?
Thank you so much. People can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram as Palu Malerba. I post things about my travels, so cultural design. We're getting more into packaging in different countries, which is very exciting. And then my agency is creativewise.co as on the website as well as Instagram.
Awesome. And I'll carry those in the show notes. So Palu, it's been a pleasure, and I always love connecting with you and chatting and learning a little bit more about who you are and what you do. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's been very fun.
Wonderful.